It is your Friday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a great day out there today. Fantastic show coming up. Lots of NFL talk in just a minute here with Ben Goessling from the Star Tribune. We will get into some of the keys to the Vikings' success this season, in addition to a deeper dive into the Kirk Cousins benching in Atlanta, what it all means. Could he wind up back in Minnesota in 2025? I don't think so. Ben leaves the door slightly open if certain circumstances were to come into play, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think this is mostly about Kirk and Atlanta and nothing else, but Ben and I will get into all that here in just a minute. An obscure but fantastic NFL rule will make an appearance towards the end of the show. First, though, what did I miss? Hopefully you missed it. Hopefully you didn't have to watch Wolves versus Knicks on Thursday night, the much-anticipated return of Karl-Anthony Towns to Target Center, a pregame love fest, fans giving him a lot of love, players on the Wolves giving him a lot of love, and then it got down to business. It was time to play. And it started out pretty well for the Wolves. They were up like 29-22 late in the first quarter, and then I blinked, and it was Knicks by 23. Like, I don't know what happened exactly other than the Knicks just absolutely blitzed them. Towns was fantastic, wound up with like 32 points, 20 rebounds, something like that. Didn't have to play a ton because they were up by so much. He was 5 of 5 from three-point range. Julius Randle got off to a nice start from the Wolves, but again, showing maybe where his fit isn't the best. I'll get into that in a minute here. Final score was 133-107, and it really wasn't even that close. Just massive disappointment from the Wolves and the displeasure voiced by Wolves fans, and I'm sure it was twofold. One, that they were losing so badly, and two, that they were being reminded of a trade that a lot of them did not like that came right before the season. Now, I think to get into this game, I would like to read an email from reader Steve. Let's play the sounder here.
Time to check my social media, yeah.
To see who loves me online.
Hashtag blessed life.
Steve says, "Hi, Mike. Love the show. Been hooked ever since listening to your coverage of the Wolves playoff run last year. Keep up the good work." Thank you, Steve. "I had the pleasure or misfortune of attending the Wolves game tonight." He wrote this late last night. "The fanfare of the moment was truly special to witness in person, yet it all fell apart so quickly. I'll leave the analysis to you, but it struck me how opposite this significant homecoming was compared to that of Kirk Cousins a couple of weeks ago. You have that game where the Vikings crushed the Falcons and made Kirk look horrible on his way to being benched. All the worries about the offseason changes were thrown out the window. Then you have tonight where the Wolves play atrocious offense and maybe more atrocious defense, and they let Cat go crazy. We looked lost without Cat, and I think all the fears about this trade are going to be here for a long time. Look forward to hearing your analysis." Steve from St. Louis Park. Steve, good email. Thank you for that. I've got 3 things about this that I think are important. Kind of a favorite thing of mine is how many things that seem contradictory can be true at the same time. I think we have to have some nuance in thinking about all this, but I'm coming around on some things that I was a little bit stubborn about initially. So here are 3 things that I think are true about all of this. Here's number 1 that I'm still going to stick with. I don't think the Wolves, as constructed last season, even when they went to the Western Conference Finals, if they run it back, I don't think that's a championship team. And I don't think that was ever going to be a championship team with Karl-Anthony Towns as their second best player, making the kind of money that he makes. Now, the start of the year he's having for the Knicks is showing me something, but still, we had 9 years of evidence in Minnesota that he just wasn't quite that guy. For as great as he was, for as beloved as he was not going to be that guy. He was not a special superstar NBA Finals kind of player. I'm willing to be proven wrong on that, and if the Knicks go on and win a championship, we will be hearing about it for even longer, that he was in fact that guy. But I don't think it was wrong to reconfigure this core. I think the long-term idea was a good one because I think the Wolves' best window is probably still ahead of them. But these two other things can also be true at the same time, and this is what I didn't want to admit initially. The first thing, the second thing overall, but the first of the two things I didn't want to admit is that fans and the team maybe deserved a chance to see if this could have been special a second time. I know you start getting into salary cap jail, you start getting into problems a year down the road. Maybe it's harder to trade Cat a year from now if he doesn't have a great year, if he gets hurt, things like that, and then you're really stuck. You got all sorts of competitive problems with the second apron, with not being able to sign guys in free agency, things like that. I think, though, fans would have loved to find out, and the joy that was taken away from them that I think Jeff Day spoke so well to when we talked on this show earlier this week. I think that was evident in Thursday night's game, that that the fans loved Karl-Anthony Towns more than I realized. I probably got stuck in the Twitter echo chamber of the frustrations with his game more than the joy that he brought a lot of people, and that people really fell in love with last year's team for good reason. A deep playoff run, enjoyable basketball, looked like a team that really genuinely liked to be with each other. That has been missing. There is a hole that you can see right now that is missing. It is not just Cat on offense. It is not just Cat, presence-wise. It's just his general, his general ability to keep things loose, to keep things light, and yes, of course, all the on-court stuff as well. So I think I underestimated his impact on both the locker room, maybe a little bit on the court, and certainly on the fan base. And then the third thing that can also be true is that even if a trade wasn't a bad idea, the trade they made itself that I liked at the time, there's got to be another piece to it. There's got to be another component to it, because I just don't know if Julius Randle is it, and I'm being nice. He's, I think players after the game were kind of talking around it a little bit, like, hey, there's not floor spacing, people got to start cutting, everybody's got their own strengths and weaknesses, stuff like that. I'm not 100% sure who they're talking about. They could be talking about collectively, but man, that sounds like they're talking about Julius Randle, a guy who had a really good start to the game, but had 5 turnovers, a guy that just kind of stops the ball a lot. Even if he passes out of his sets sometimes, it's just a different kind of offense. There's got to be a second trade. There's got to be, I don't think he's not a long-term piece on this roster. Something's got to happen, either by the trade deadline or sometime this offseason, to say, hey, you know what? This was just kind of a step along the way for you in your career. This was a step along the way in us, speaking from the Timberwolves standpoint, acquiring somebody else who is a better roster fit. I think DiVincenzo is going to be fine. I don't know what the deal is. He had a terrible game. Rudy Gobert was a minus 37. Like, that was just painful to watch when he's not involved offensively, and then he gets, on the court for a lot of easy defensive stuff when someone like Cat is putting him in a blender. That's just not great. That's just bad to see. But, Gobert was the defensive player of the year last year. Like, you don't have the kind of season they had last season without Rudy Gobert. They made their decision. They extended Gobert and traded Cat. We can debate whether that was the right thing. I think Gobert is certainly essential to their identity right now. I also think Anthony Edwards is right that they don't have an offensive identity right now, and they sure were closer to having one when they had Karl-Anthony Towns. So the trade they made, which I liked at the time, I'm coming around to the idea that I might have liked it in spirit or understood it in spirit, but in practice, in the actual trade itself, it is incomplete at best, because you can't have Julius Randle on this team long term. It's just not going to work. He is not a 1-for-1 or an 80% for 100% equivalent to Cat. This was not a trade that is complete at this point. So a lot of work to be done, a lot to unpack, a lot of unhappy fans, a lot of Wolves players happy for Cat. You can still see they care for him a lot, want him to succeed. Anthony Edwards acknowledging that, that was pretty much Cat's dream come true. Cat acknowledging this wasn't just any other game. He had the greatest homecoming, like Steve mentioned, complete opposite from Kirk Cousins. And I was never really worried that much that the Cousins move was going to backfire as much. I didn't know Sam Darnold was going to have this kind of year, but I was definitely more pro Cousins leaving than anything else. And obviously that's worked out very well for them. But yes, a complete opposite from the Cousins reunion comeback game last couple weeks ago. This one didn't go the Wolves' way. I guess the nicest thing you can say is that it's only December, a lot of basketball to play, and that's good for the Wolves because there's a lot for them to work out. Let's talk Vikings today with Ben Goessling from the Star Tribune. Vikings and Falcons, I suppose, Ben, as it turns out.
Yeah, it's. I guess we're going to cover the waterfront of current and former Vikings quarterbacks, obviously, with the Kirk Cousins news of the week. So, yes, it still applies, I guess, applies to the Vikings in the sense that the offseason decision they made was part of what precipitated this. And yet, there's just interesting components of this. So, yeah, it's newsworthy in our parts, I think, still, even though.
What do you make of Cousins getting benched? 14 games into, a 4-year contract was never going to be what it really was, but it was on paper, at least. This is a 2-year contract based on how much money there was. To not even get through the first year, to get, replaced by a rookie because of your play, that's got to be A, kind of humbling, and B, not what the Falcons had in mind.
No, it can't be what the Falcons had in mind. I mean, that contract is 2 full guaranteed seasons, which is the thing that he wanted from the Vikings that he didn't get. And then if he is on the roster by the 5th day of the league year next year, right, he has $10 million for 2026 already guaranteed. So they're going to have to make a decision on him very early. But the choice they made this week kind of tells you, I think, that they've already made their decision. I mean, when I was down there a couple of weeks ago, I heard a lot about how excited they were about Michael Penix and how good they felt about his progress. So it seemed even then, I mean, the questions were already starting then about, is he going to lose the job? And they stuck by him at that point. And, he was okay against the Vikings, but he throws a couple of picks. And then it basically seemed like they were doing everything they could to avoid putting the game on his shoulders against the Raiders on Monday night. And if you're operating your offense that way, it's just not going to work. So it would seem like if you're because a lot of the discussion about when do you put Penix in is they're in the middle of a playoff race. Do you want to drop a rookie quarterback in the middle of that situation and say, okay, you got to carry us when you have veteran players on the team that are hoping to make it, and there's expectations to come on a rookie quarterback that way. But if they did this now, it tells you they have considered all of these things, and they still feel better about Penix, which if that's where we are, and a lot of this depends on how much of it is because of the Achilles, I have to think it means the end for Kirk Cousins in Atlanta is coming. And when I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, it was, this idea of him as a private contractor quarterback. He had hoped to retire in Atlanta. His wife's from there. Her family is still there. His family's in Florida. So I think there were a lot of reasons why he was hoping to be there if it wasn't going to be in Minnesota. But now it may be somewhere else entirely. And I don't know how long he's going to want to do the 1 year at a time circuit, but that may be what it entails for him the rest of the way.
Well, and it's, the interesting thing about this is like when the Falcons drafted Penix, you could kind of see a way out of the box where if Cousins plays well enough this year, and if you sign him for that much, you're expecting at least a good year out of him or a reasonable level of quarterback play. You can then trade him in the offseason. That's not his preference, I'm sure.
If he waives his no trade clause.
If he waives his no trade clause, which is, again, like you said, part of the greatest hits part of the contract that Mike McCartney put together for him. It's a beauty of a deal for Kirk Cousins. So yes, if he would do that, but if he sees the writing on the wall and he's not going to play there, you'd think, okay, he probably would agree to that. But if you have to bench him because he's thrown 1 touchdown and 9 interceptions in his last 5 starts, what kind of trade value does he have? Like, who would take him with 27? He's got $27.5 million salary next season, let alone kind of the the cap charge that sticks with the Falcons, things like that. Like who's going to trade for him for this point, unless you look at it and say, we think this was because he's still feeling the effects of the Achilles. Give him another year. He might be more of a league average quarterback at age 37 next year. And someone might say, okay, for $27.5 million, that's a risk we're willing to take.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to have somebody that looks at him and says, we can still get $27 million worth of quarterback play out of him. But it's the tricky thing there is what does $27 million get you? I mean, what does league average quarterback play get you at this point? It seems like you either want to have the guy or somebody that you think could turn into the guy, or you're starting over. I mean, the market for the middle, which is kind of where he's always been, is not a great place to be for a team. No. And I don't know if anybody's going to look at him. I mean, the obvious ones would be San Francisco if Brock Purdy is not in their future, the Rams if Matthew Stafford is retiring or moving on, although, those guys are about the same age. I don't know that it's probably just a matter of if Cousins wants to play longer. I mean, those two, I guess, would make some sense. People have talked about Cleveland, where he gets reunited with Kevin Stefanski. Yeah. I think the other possibility is he says, I'm not going to the Raiders or something, and they get forced to cut him because he will make his money either way. And then basically somebody could sign him kind of on the Russell Wilson deal. Not that he's going to start as much as Russell Wilson, but you can the comparison to Russell Wilson is that because he has offset language in his contract, which means he makes his money from the Falcons either way, and then the Falcons get a reduction in their cap hit based on what another team pays him. Other teams are not going to want to do the Falcons any favors. So they're going to say, Kirk, you're making your money either way. $1 million is a bonus. We don't need to give you more than that because you're already making way too much as it is. Right. And we don't want to help your former employer that you probably aren't in the mood to help out either. So you signed him to a league minimum deal. He gets his money from the Falcons and gets that extra $1 million. Well, I guess it ends up being he makes the same amount. He makes the same amount, but the team that gets him gets a bargain. Which pot does it come from? And then the team that gets him for league minimum salary. You're basically playing for free. Would he start somewhere? I don't know that. I mean, I think a lot of that depends on how healthy somebody feels he is and what he can provide. Where he goes, but I almost think that scenario makes more sense for another team than a trade. It only takes one, but you may have a lot of teams that say, you know what, we're just going to hold our cards here and let him get to the market, and then we don't really have to pay anything for him. That may be the way it ends up going. Does the NFL, because it's more complicated to get the cap, I know that like at baseball, I can't remember other sports that do this, but like, is there a provision where a team that takes him in a trade could say, okay, but the Falcons are paying X amount of this salary, or is it all or nothing? Okay. No, you can do that. I mean, basically what that ends up being is you would, and this happened, I think, with Yannick Ngakoue when he came here. Oh, sure. Sure. So I think the way that ended up going is the Jaguars essentially signed him to a new deal that reduced his salary, or maybe even the mechanics of it come through the new deal where the Vikings take on part of it to make the deal, and the Jaguars I think took on a part of it. So there are ways to do it, and it might have been a contract with the Jaguars and then another one with the Vikings. I can't quite remember what the mechanics were, but yes, there are ways to do it. And then another team once he got traded again. Right. I mean, the mechanics are clunky, but short version is, yes, you can do it, and then you leave the mechanics to Rob Brzezinski or whoever the cap guy is in that particular building to figure out, like, just tell us that it's done, and then we'll go from there. That's what you have those people for. So, yes, you could do that. There is a way to make that happen, and we'll see if that becomes an option for them fairly early into the offseason, because this will have to get done fairly quickly. Ngakoue, by the way, is an underrated all-time bad Spielman move. Like they bring him in for I don't know how many games to start off 1-5, so they trade him again, and they end up giving up like kind of a mid to high second round pick for a low third round pick, and get basically nothing else out of the deal. It was not up there with Chris Herndon and Corey Wiedvik.
I was going to say Kari Wiedvik was the one that springs to mind. Wasn't he? Didn't they give up a fifth to get
Give up
Wiedvik?
a fifth for him, and I think they gave up a fourth for Chris Herndon, a tight end that never.
Oh gosh,
played.
that's right.
So,
I forgot about Chris Herndon. Wow,
yeah.
that was a fourth. You're right.
Yeah. For a guy that prized draft picks,
Just
sometimes he did not prize them so much.
Okay, so let's play this out a little further. Then I want to get to some other Viking stuff before we go. So let's say they cut him. I do know a team that might be in the market for an insurance policy quarterback next year if Sam Darnold leaves in free agency and they're not 100% sure if J.J. McCarthy is ready to be the guy. Now they've already got Daniel Jones in the building. He could be that guy depending on what what the salary is there for him. But is there a sliver of you that makes you think there would be a reunion possible?
I think it's possible. I mean, I think, and the reason I say this, I want to lay all of this out because apparently we are still in our feelings enough about Kirk Cousins on social media that thinking through this is well, we just have to spend a little time to do it. If they need a backup quarterback or a veteran option that is fairly cheap, you would have to feel good about his health, but the people that would be making that decision are the people that did the surgery on his Achilles. You would have to feel good about how he could fit into the room. I think that's the biggest question is, does he come in wanting to start, or does he say, I mean, in this scenario, we're a ways down the road from this. This requires Darnold to leave. This requires Daniel Jones to not be the guy. This requires J.J. McCarthy to be ready to go. He would have to basically be coming in saying, you are a backup that we trust could start if necessary, for whatever reason becomes necessary, but you are not here to be Kirk Cousins, captain of the team anymore. And I think that may be the toughest part of this is he comes back in and there's still a lot of teammates that think very highly of him, including a lot of those linemen, including Justin Jefferson. Can he come back in and be kind of a supporting character? I think that's probably the toughest part of it. But if that can happen, this is the guy that helped Kevin O'Connell build the Vikings' current offense in Minnesota. And a lot of that, what they're doing this year, is built on what they did those last 2 years. So if you have somebody that you say, I mean, this is why Nick Mullins is still here, because they trust that in a pinch, he spent a lot of time here, he can run the offense. If you felt good enough about him physically, if it was cheap, which it would be, and if he could fit into the role, which is probably the biggest if, I don't think they'd rule it out. I think they still think highly enough of him and their time working with him that it's not impossible. I mean, effectively, it's a cheaper version of what they wanted to do this year. And it would not come with the awkwardness of he's starting now, but is he going to start in a year? If you did it, say, you're not starting. You're coming in as the support system. We trust that you can start if we need you to do that. But this is not your show. The biggest question I have, like I say, is how would everybody feel about that? And this is very, very hypothetical. But I don't think the Vikings would be as closed off to that idea as perhaps it might seem from the outside. I think they may look through it and say, you know what, if we can find the fit, if we can make this all work in the room, which, it didn't stop them from doing that with Daniel Jones. I don't think they'd rule that out. No.
One more question on this. How long does Cousins want to play? Like, say he just gets to the end of this year and he's like, you know what? I don't want to go somewhere else. I thought we were going to put down roots here. Would he just – I feel like he's got too much competitiveness to end like this, but like where do you think that's swirling around in his head right now?
It's a great question. I mean, I think that is going to have something to do with this too, because he's certainly made plenty of money. I mean, and he would make more if he keeps playing, but he will get paid by the Falcons next year, regardless of what happens. So if he said, you know what, I'm at $300 and some million in career earnings, I'm good. Maybe he would do that. I don't know. It has seemed like he wanted to keep playing longer because, he's talking about retiring in Atlanta and signing a 4-year deal to do that. I don't think he's planning to be done at age 37 next year, or he'll be 37 next year. Right. But, if your options are hang it up or move your family again for a year and, what does that look like, especially if it's San Francisco or something where you're moving to a different part of the country, and all of that stuff I think does come into the equation. Would he just say, you know what, it's been fun, but I'm going to hang it up? I don't know well enough to understand what would be going through his head in that scenario, but my hunch is he'd want to play. But I also could see something where if it's like, this is too much of a hassle. I mean, his kids are getting older. It's,
Right.
a lot of guys make that decision when family comes into it at some point. I think that would be a consideration for him as well.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with Royal Credit Union's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
A few more things. You're writing in the Friday newsletter about health and staying fresh for this time of year, which is not easy. It's a grind. It's a long league year. They've generally been pretty healthy this season. They've had obviously the Christian Darrisaw injury is the biggest one that stands out as, the season ender. We've had Pace injured for a while here, a couple different times. Cashman was out a bit. Gilmore has been out, but by and large, injuries are going to happen. They've done a good job of keeping their core guys on the field. How are they doing that? What philosophically or medically are they doing to ensure that?
Yeah, I mean, some of this obviously is luck. I mean, some of this is you're going to have years where no matter what you do, you run into issues with something happens on the field and it takes you out for the year. So they've had good luck for the most part with that. And, I'll pause so everybody can knock on whatever wood is nearby if you are so inclined to do that. But a lot of what they've done in practices the last few weeks has been just building in more time off. You have seen them turn their Wednesday practice, which is typically one of the bigger days of the week during the meat of the season. They've turned that into a walkthrough just about every week since the beginning of November, kind of just to give players a little more time to recover. And they did it again this week. They have effectively given Harrison Smith and Stephon Gilmore a vet day on Friday. I'm looking back on it. It's been every week of the season that they've done it with those two guys because 13-year veterans, they don't exactly need the practice time. And Friday is quicker practice. It's typically not as big of a work day anyway. So I think they've said we don't need to put the extra few snaps on your legs, onto your bodies, if we can avoid that. And neither of those guys is somebody that anybody worries about being ready to go and prepared to play.
Right.
So it's been some of those things, but it's interesting with those two guys especially, and this is more Harrison Smith right now without Gilmore on the field, but they are effectively both practicing one day a week. I mean, the Thursday practices are kind of where they go at it a little bit more. That's generally been the routine, and they are kind of just banking on enough off-field work, enough film study, enough meeting time that it's not an issue, which, again, for those guys – in particular, it's probably not going to be. And they have an older defense. I mean, they have a lot of guys who have played a lot of football. So the level of understanding of what you need to get ready is pretty high. And then the needs to take players off the field are also pretty high. But just looking at it, Harrison Smith has played more snaps than anybody on their defense this year, which is kind of wild. I mean, they had talked initially about kind of reducing his workload, but he's probably going to end up north of 1,000 snaps again. He's at 887 right now. So
yeah, you would think so.
If he's playing well enough to stay out there, which I think overall he has, they are going to keep going with it. So a lot of this is kind of just trying to find that balance, like Kevin O'Connell talked about, of getting prep time in, but also getting recovery time. And he spends a lot of time consulting with Brian Flores on this because Brian Flores in New England from those years in New England has a lot of experience playing deep into the playoffs. Kevin O'Connell did it once with the Rams, actually twice. They went into at least the second round of the playoffs both of his years there, but it was an annual thing for the Patriots to be playing the conference championship game or the Super Bowl. So there's a lot of discussion about if the Vikings can make a run to those later rounds of the playoffs, how do you arrive at that point with everybody being healthy? Because you look at the Lions right now. I mean, the Lions is the Vikings' health situation perfect? No. But the Lions would trade places with them in a
Oh, geez. Yeah. They're decimated right now.
Yeah, they are. And that could have a lot to say about how the NFC shakes out. So
yeah.
a lot of this just becomes this thing of how can you turn the dial enough? And it's not a perfect science,
Right.
I don't think. I mean, they try to incorporate science and research as much as they can. I know their medical staff spends a lot of time having players fill out, just brief chats. They have iPads in the locker room, and the players just fill out something saying, "Hey, how are you feeling today? Anything hurting?" And they use GPS data and all of those kinds of things to track it. But there's not a perfect way to do this. Some of it's going to be a feel thing, and some of it's going to be individualized. But a lot of what they're trying to do is arrive in January with the freshest, healthiest team possible and hope that makes the difference in a playoff game.
Well, and it seems like they also, especially with these veterans, kind of exercise an abundance of caution. Like if Gilmore feels something, get him out of the game. Don't make it worse. Aaron Jones feels something in the London game. Get him out of the game. He ends up not missing the game, if I'm not mistaken, right? He missed the rest of that game, but then they had the bye week, and then he was able to be back in 2 weeks, and doesn't seem like he's really missed a beat in terms of the health. He had the rib thing for a while, and we don't know if that was really impacting the ball security, but he's played. He's been available, and his health was a big question coming in there. So I wonder if some of that is also like catching things early before they become bigger problems. Yeah,
and I think some of it, we have seen them do this, whether it's Jones, certainly Byron Murphy. I remember this being a question. He got a more affordable deal because he was coming off of a back injury. I think they have said, we will take on guys that have a little bit of an injury history to them and hope that, or I shouldn't say hope, they bank on the idea that their medical staff and their training staff is going to help make the difference. That doesn't always work. See Davenport, Marcus, but that one blew up pretty badly for them. But overall, I think we've seen this enough to think that this is probably part of their strategy of, if there's some level of discount that you get from a player that's had some injuries, and they say, we can find a way to keep this guy on the field and make a difference, that can all work together. I do think there's some of that built into the approach between the front office, the medical staff, and the coaching staff. I think all of that stuff is kind of in lockstep there, the way they've gone about it.
Is Davenport another one of the Detroit guys that's hurt this year, or is he somewhere else? I know he got hurt somewhere.
I think he's in Detroit. And yeah, I know he's hurt. Let's just look this up here very quickly. I
think that's right. I thought I saw
that's the case.
I thought I saw this long list of like Detroit injuries, and he's one of them.
Yes, he is in Detroit, and certainly had injury history.
Everywhere.
Became the Vikings to the point where they wrote his contract a certain way because of a shoulder injury he'd had, and then it was an ankle most of the season. And I think a lot of that is some guys just can't stay healthy. Some guys take a longer time to get back on the field for any number of reasons. He seems to be one of those. But he's on that list for the Lions of players who are injured, and given the fact Aiden Hutchinson is out, I'm sure they would like to have him if they could get him.
One last point in general and on this subject, it seems like, it doesn't just seem like, the data says they have been great on third and fourth down this season, those kind of big downs. I know I overemphasize the weighty downs because I just love that O'Connelism, and I saw that in Mark Craig's story showed up. Even the players are using the words weighty downs now. It was Jerry Tillery, I think, that he wrote about, who got the game ball the other night, even though he only had like one assisted tackle, but he was in on a lot of those short yardage plays, made some important plays on those third and fourth down plays against the Bears. Is any of this connected to that, do you think? Like understanding that you need to be at your best on these down, trying to keep guys fresh within a game, or is this more of a over the course of 18 games kind of approach that they're taking to health and freshness?
Well, I think it's over the course of 18 games, but I do think, they know there's a lot of their philosophy that understands not every play, not every situation is created equal. You hear them talk about, the other O'Connelism is be at your best when your best is required. Situational mastery. These are all things you've heard him talk about by this point quite a bit. Anybody who pays attention to these things probably knows these phrases. I think there is an understanding that you have to treat certain situations differently, and you need your best players on the field when the game is on the line and it's close, which it often is for the Vikings. I think back to Jonathan Grenard a couple of weeks ago, where they call a timeout because he's so gassed that he needs a break to catch his breath before the last play of the game.
That's right.
And
He's been chasing around Kyler Murray for 2 plays. And
he's been chasing around Kyler Murray, and he's just completely exhausted. So they take their last time out just to give him a few more seconds, because I think they initially went out there without him on the field, and they were like, no, we need him out here. So let's give him another minute and change to catch his breath, and then he comes in and makes the play at the end of the game. So I think some of it's that. I think some of it, I think you guys talked about this earlier in the week, you and Andrew, but they blitz a lot on early downs. They have been able to put teams in third and long situations quite a bit. Just looking this up on Sports Info Solutions this morning, who we've started working with, and it's been a great resource for us. But they have, I think, 6 interceptions this year on 3rd and 7 or longer. So they lead the league in turnovers, but they have had guys been able to make a lot of plays in those situations. And a lot of that comes from not bringing tons of pressure on third downs. They do a lot of drop 7, drop 8 on third downs, put people in coverage, and then they're able to make some plays that way. So I think all of it is kind of working together in different facets of how they go about it.
They don't rotate a ton from what I can remember in the secondary or among their linebackers. They kind of have the guys they like in the back kind of 7, but the front, like the guys who are getting the initial push or like trying to stop the run on 3rd and 1 or trying to get a pass rush on 3rd and 10, they play a fair number of different guys. They rotate through there, and I wonder if there's something to that in terms of, hey, this guy hasn't played for a few downs. He's 100% fresh right now, and he's the guy that ends up making the play. Yeah,
and they have a lot of pass rush groupings where it's not very many defensive linemen on the field. I mean, they will put 3 or 4 edge rusher types. I mean, those could, 4-3, those guys are defensive ends, but we call them linebackers in this system mostly. But in terms of the pure defensive linemen, they're the only one of them that has even played 50% of their snaps this year is Harrison Phillips, and he's only at 58%. So it's not like they are having these linemen go out there for 60 snaps a game and asking them to play 80% of the time. And I do think that matters, because we saw a lot of times under Mike Zimmer where, 2017, I will contend for the rest of my career that part of the reason that thing did not end with them in the Super Bowl is players were gassed.
Yeah.
We heard it from players. We heard it kind of after that season. There was so much of a load, whether it was guys playing 1,000-some snaps a season or still just practicing hard during the week. They still did a lot of harder practices during the week. And he eventually changed on that towards the end of his career. He started to give guys a little bit more time, but I think it was reluctantly done. And certainly in 2017, you think about those last 6 quarters, we've talked about it a million times.
Yeah.
They get outscored 55-19. I'm throwing out the pick 6 with Case Keenum in the NFC title game there, but they were up 17-0 at halftime of that game against the Saints, and then they need the miracle because the Saints had come back. I think a lot of that was just, you need to have people who are fresh in those games when things come down to it, and one play may make the difference. And this is where, too, a guy like Dallas Turner, who we started to see a little bit more, but he's only played 235 snaps this year.
Yeah.
He's that young. We talk about rookies hitting the wall sometimes. He should not be anywhere near the wall. Mentally, it's a longer season, but physically, he hasn't played anywhere close to the number of snaps he would have played at Alabama.
No.
So if you have that guy with that kind of speed coming off the edge in a playoff game when you're playing another team that has a tired offensive tackle, maybe that makes the difference. I think those types of things, playoff games can come down to something that minute. And that may be it. So I think some of those things are done with that in mind.
Hidden edges, minor efficiencies. Seems like something the general manager would be searching for and in favor of, and the head coach too. But that's maybe where the trader in Kwesi comes in, looking for those market efficiencies, the health, just saving guys, and maybe even some of their defensive front philosophy and rotating guys through kind of a lot of low cost guys. I know they paid Phillips because they value him, but they're not paying for a lot of defensive line right now, but they're finding guys that seem to fit and inserting guys, even guys like the Redmond that just started playing more. He's an undrafted guy. Like they've rotated a lot of guys through there, a lot of low cost guys. But if you've got guys who make a quarter of what other guys make and play half as much but are fresh all the time, they're probably fairly equivalent players in a lot of those big downs. So, all right. Ben, appreciate it as always. Go subscribe to the Access Vikings newsletter. Follow our coverage. Ben and the crew will be in Seattle on Sunday. We'll have more Access Vikings later this week as well. Ben, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Great stuff, as usual, from Ben. Love having him on Fridays now during the NFL season. Keep that going through however long this Viking season goes. Side note, Stephon Gilmore looks like he could be back this week. He's been practicing, full participant, could be a full go against the Seahawks on Sunday, but they did add Harrison Smith to the injury report. Wonder how he is going to hold up. A couple other guys kind of banged up. We'll see what they look like going into Seattle, but generally speaking, they've been able to keep the injuries to a minimum. Get to them before they get really bad, and that's been a key to this season, especially with such a veteran-heavy lineup on defense. Let's finish quickly with the cooler. The Chargers did one of the coolest things in the NFL last night in Thursday Night Football. They did a fair catch kick. Obscure rule in the NFL lets you try a field goal at the end of the half or the end of a game from the spot of a fair catch. It's basically an untimed down where they don't even have a chance to block it. There was a fair catch interference penalty that gave them some extra yards. So out comes Cameron Dicker for a 57-yard try, ends up making it, cuts Denver's lead from 21-10 to 21-13. Chargers go on to win 34-27, a huge swing in that whole, AFC West, a big game there, has some wild card implications, things like that. Just pretty cool. You don't see that every day. I think it was the first one they said that had been executed in 47 years. So pretty cool to see that. Pretty cool to watch a rare moment in kicking history. That will do it for me today. I should have a Vikings post-game show this week. Didn't do one last week because it was a Monday night game and it comes quick on the Tuesday morning show, but I should have a post-game post-game Sunday show. Royce on Monday. Limited next week because I'm taking some time off for the holidays, but there'll at least be Sunday, Monday stuff, and then the week after that, probably the same, maybe 2 or 3 shows the week of New Year's, and then back after the final holiday break. Getting back into a regular schedule. But still some stuff coming up next week, so thank you for listening. I'll be back at it again on Sunday, I do believe.